Hello, everybody. It's time for another session at the Meta Center Wednesday Talks. So, hope everyone has had a wonderful week. It's been beautiful weather so far. So, hopefully, that sunniness is shining through your heart as well as we get into the session today with Brother Phap Hai. The session today is called Crossing the Flood, Nurturing Resilience. A bit about our speaker today. He is a senior monastic student of Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, who was ordained in 1997 and formally authorized to teach by Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh in January 2003. Originally from Australia, he is an active meditation teacher who leads retreats, days of mindfulness, workshops, and talks throughout the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, South America, and Asia. Brother Phap Hai has the ability to offer a charming blend of ancient wisdom, Dharma scholarship, and contemporary applications, sharing deep teaching in a warm, accessible, and humorous manner. He currently resides at Mountain Spring Monastery in the Blue Mountains, not too far from us. In addition to numerous online teachings and classes, his books, Nothing to It, 10 Ways to Be at Home with Yourself, and The 8 Realizations of Great Being are published by Parallax Press and are available everywhere. So, as always, this will be an interactive session. So, Brother Phap Hai will start with an introduction to the topic and have a bit of a talk. And then Tina will jump in to facilitate a discussion. So, if you have any questions throughout, especially at the discussion, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing it with everyone, you could also send them anonymously to Tina. And just a quick note, this session will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube, but not all of you will not be identified by name. And so, yeah, you won't appear on there. And without further ado, over to you, brother.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to be together with everybody. I think we've been trying to make this happen for quite a number of months. So I'm so happy that all the causes and conditions have come together. I'd just like to invite everybody to take a moment to come back to our bodies, to take a moment perhaps to close our eyes and just to energetically let go of all the experiences that we've had today up to now, and any expectations we might have for the moments that are coming in what we call the future. Just energetically letting go of every expectation, every memory, and gently sinking into the space that you find yourself, perhaps by becoming aware of all the sounds that you hear in this moment, loud sounds, soft sounds, sounds that you find pleasant, sounds that you might find a little unpleasant. Just coming into contact with the whole kaleidoscope of sound present for you in the space that you find yourself. Slowly and gently letting go of your awareness of sound, I invite you to become aware of the sensations of your body. Just to become aware of your body in terms of sensation, perhaps noticing the parts of your body in which you're experiencing the strongest sensations at this moment in time. For many of us, this might be the contact of our body and the chair or the cushion. We might also become aware of our arms and hands in our lap. We might become aware of the different temperatures of parts of our body, the parts of our body that are covered with clothes, and the parts of our body like our face, our hands, and so on that are exposed to the air. And becoming aware whether we experience any of those sensations as pleasant or we experience any of those as unpleasant. Not evaluating our response in any way, but just being present for sensation in our body. And I invite you to bring your attention to your felt sense of breath, not changing your breath in any way. If your breath is short, we let it be short. If it's long, we let it be long. And we just come into contact with the physical sensation of our in-breath and out-breath. As we breathe in, we're present for our in-breath all the way through. And as we breathe out, we're present for our out-breath all the way through. As we breathe in and out, bringing awareness to our in-breath and out-breath, we notice that in and of themselves, without any effort on our part, our in-breath and out-breath are becoming deeper and slower. So we remain aware of the natural rhythm of breath, deepening, slowing. As I continue to be aware of my in-breath and out-breath, I notice pockets of calm in my mind. And I notice that my body is easing, calming my mind, easing my body. as I continue to be rooted in the physical sensation of my breath, I establish myself firmly in this present moment, with nowhere to go, nothing to do. Dear friends, I once again just wanted to say thank you to everyone at the Metta Center and express my appreciation for all of the wonderful work that everyone at the Metta Center is doing, and also for everybody's practice. It's so wonderful to think of everybody cultivating a heart of love, cultivating joy, cultivating mindfulness, and I'm really happy that I have a chance to connect in with everybody this evening. With all of the rain that we've been having on the East Coast, and I'm thinking about rain since earlier we were reminded of the blessing that we've been having over the last week or 10 days or so of having some sunshine, something that we took for granted for such a long time here on the East Coast of Australia, and now it's become something extraordinary. And so as earlier in the evening we were reminded about the sunshine, the beautiful weather, I started thinking about the rain. And with all the rain we've been having on the East Coast, I was reminded of the time many years ago now in Plum Village when we gathered for a Dharma talk together with Thay. It began to rain outside. Now, this is not so unusual for the south of France in particular times of the year. It can rain for weeks at a time, similar to the weather that we've been having here on the East Coast recently. But somehow that day, Tay stopped his talk. There was a little over 100 people in the hall at the time, and Tay asked us to go and listen to the rain. He asked us to go and sit around at various windows or sit outside on the veranda and simply listen to the rain. And he shared with us if that we're able to listen fully to the rain, it would be better than any Dharma talk. To listen means to be present and to open a space of availability, to have the willingness to understand. This is, to me, the heart of meditation. Meditation is about opening a space of availability to each moment of our lives. The capacity to take a mindful breath, to take a mindful step, is at the same time both a practice and a realization, both a practice and the fruit of the practice at the same time. We sit mindfully in order to be able to sit mindfully. We walk mindfully in order to be able to walk mindfully. It's both a cause and a result at the same time. The great Zen teacher, Master Dogen, reminds us of something that my own teacher, Thay, Thich Nhat Hanh shared with us many times. Master Dogen reminds us that meditation, sitting or walking meditation, or the spiritual life in general, is not what you're doing. This is the common mistake. My spiritual life or my spiritual practice is based on sitting or walking meditation or chanting the sutras, reciting the Buddha's name, and so on. With this mindset, our practice is a practice that's caught up in doing. Master Dogen reminds us that the basis of our practice is called the Dharma door of joyful ease. This is what we call in Plum Village practice, the practice of arriving, or as I like to call it, ah-riving. Since when you're finally home, when you're at your destination, you have that delicious feeling of ease, ah-riving. We sit in order to sit. We walk in order to walk. The fruit of practice is not something that we can obtain later on, but it's available right here and right now. We have this mistaken idea that we need to put forth a lot of effort and a lot of struggle in our practice. This sense that if we knuckle down and we work hard enough, that we will have somehow earned our peace, our joy, our happiness, our liberation, whatever it is we're looking for. Peace and joy and liberation are not things that can be earned. They're our birthright, our basic nature. This is the essential teaching of Buddhism. So I think we need to ask ourselves, what are we waiting for? What condition do we think we need in order to claim our birthright? In Zen, we talk about the work of the moment. That's considered to be our real invitation as meditation practitioners. This moment, this collection of unexpected moments when we're challenged internally and externally, when we're called to look deeply into our fear, into our isolation, into our anger, are among the most powerful if we're willing to turn towards them. The work of the moment is the work of being willing to show up unconditionally for what's happening in our mind, our heart, and our body, and the world around. And also through that, to understand that it's through cultivating our own clarity, our own compassion and steadfastness that the situation internally and externally can change. When we consider war, injustice, discrimination, and so on, our usual tendency is to focus primarily on fixing the external situation. The Buddha's insight is that the external is a reflection of the individual and collective internal. They're not separate. In Plum Village, we have a saying, peace in oneself, peace in the world. This is an invitation to reflect on the internal aspects, the greed, the ill will, the ignorance within our own mind, and also to reflect on the deeper root causes of conflict, rather than just on the surface level. Without addressing the deeper issues, then as much as we would wish it to be different, as much as we can talk about it in so many different ways, or engage in so many different actions, without that deeper level of looking and deeper level of work, the situation will continue. There's a great temptation to think, oh, the situation's so difficult, whatever it might be for us. If only I had this or that condition, then everything would be perfect and I could really make a difference. I think that one of the most important realizations, one of the most difficult and subtle realizations for us to have is that in this samsara realm, there's actually never going to be a perfect moment. That perfect moment, if there is one, is right now, right in the middle of the mess. even if we ourselves are still a work in progress. That perfect moment to show up, to come forward, is right now, bringing the insight that we have, even if it might not yet be perfect. Our community, our world needs us right now just as we are. Doing the work of the moment means to have the courage and the willingness to show up and respond to each moment just as it is, just as we are. There's no perfect moment, but at the same time, with this willingness to show up, to look deeply into the root causes, every moment is a perfect moment to broaden our heart, to deepen our compassion and our wisdom. Master Linchi, Master Rinzai once said, every day is a good day. If we're willing to open our hearts to each moment and respond, then each day, just as it is the most wonderful moment for us to cultivate our hearts and to bring healing to the world inside and the world outside. Honestly, for many of us, this moment in time might seem a little or a lot unsatisfactory. But if we know how not to run away from that, then it can be the starting point of our real journey, to be willing to turn towards rather than away. And the real journey here is not a journey to somewhere in particular, or to get something that we think we don't already have. If we're not careful, this can be a major issue in our practice lives, practicing from a sense of lack, or trying to get something, to get peace, to get happiness, to get enlightened, want. This can be a major energetic thread in our practice lives. It's truly the shadow. One important aspect of this, to me, is an invitation for us to have a real look into the nature of desire, tanha in Pali. Craving or thirst is another way to translate the word tanha. Since in order for lasting inner and outer transformation to be possible, then discerning the moments in which our aspiration is coming from insight or coming from desire is essential. Of the three aspects of desire, two of them seem particularly relevant right now: the desire to become, the desire for a situation, a person, and so on, to be completely different from what it is or what they are right now. If only I could be happy, peaceful, enlightened. If only they, whoever they are in this moment, would do this or do that. The challenge here is that this mindset can lead us into a sense of passivity, of thinking that real change is only someone else's responsibility. The other aspect of tanha, desire, is the idea that we need to get rid of something or someone in order for things to be perfect. If we apply these lenses to look at our experience, then they can be a helpful framework for us to be able to discover the places and the situations in which we close down our hearts, and to be able to choose to respond differently. A while back, it occurred to me that it's often the teachers, whether people or situations, that challenge us in some way, that call us to open our hearts and minds a bit more, that offer us unexpected teachings that are the most powerful and transformative teachers of our lives. If we're only hearing things that we already know, that confirm things that we already know, how will that help us to move forward and to cultivate non-fear, to broaden our perspective, to open our heart? A real teacher, whether in the form of a person or a situation or even a feeling, is one that challenges us, not one that just confirms everything that we think we know. In that case, we haven't learned anything, have we? It's only when we're a little uncomfortable that growth is possible, not through our carefully cultivated avoidance. If we haven't looked at this tendency, tanha, which the Buddha said is actually one of our main issues, then our whole practice life can be about getting something, getting peace, getting enlightened, and so on. This is called bhavatana, the wish to become, or in simple terms, our tendency to want to get something that we think we don't have already. The other extreme is that we might have the tendency to want to get rid of something or someone. This is called vibhavatana, which we just spoke about. These manifestations of desire work both on the internal level, the micro level, and on the external macro level. To be super honest, most of us actually come to meditation practice because we either want to get something that we think we don't have, or perhaps to get rid of something. Many of us, from a consumeristic mindset, and we've been well trained in this, have turned Dharma into a thing, a set of techniques, or a set of dogmas in order to get something that we think we don't have, or to try to get rid of something that we think we don't want. In one of its original senses, Dharma means your way of showing up in the world. This is the world outside, but also the world inside, how we're showing up when we're happy, how we're present for a strong emotion like anger or depression and so on. So the world inside and the world outside. Our way of showing up in the world. It can also mean our path. And to me, this is an invitation to stop running from our lives, of thinking that our everyday lives are somehow separate from our Dharma practice, but rather to turn towards them. The deepest journey that we'll make is not the journey that we usually think of, the frantic sprint away from discomfort to some imagined shore of happiness. The Buddha has shared with us in some of the most ancient recorded texts in the Pali Canon, the Atthakavagga, the Book of Eights, that the real journey, the most profound spiritual life, consists mainly in letting go of things. Not necessarily physical things, but mainly our views, our ideas, our positions. That our practice life is not about getting something. This is so counterintuitive to our usual transactional way of approaching things. We practice in order to get something we think we don't have. So much efforting. How does this understanding that practice is not about getting something, but rather letting things go, to realize what has been there all along, change our approach? Often the catalyst or starting point of our journey is suffering, emotional, physical, or so on. Whilst the starting point of our journey is the recognition of the pain that we hold individually and collectively, hopefully it's not the end. Well, it's already a great thing if we recognize our pain, but there's more to discover. By acknowledging our pain, we begin to recognize its sources, and we begin to notice well-being, joy, ease, as well as what nurtures those qualities. We're very quick to use big words such as peace or enlightenment and so on in terms of our practice. Or even the word suffering, dukkha, which is another big word, a big concept that we're quite quick to use. I want to transform suffering. But we don't often, or often enough, take the time, in my humble opinion, to reflect on what we actually mean by these words. What's your lived experience of peace? If peace is what you're looking for, what's your experience, your lived experience of happiness? If happiness is what you're looking for, what is your lived experience of liberation right here and right now? If liberation is what you're looking for, liberated from what? If we can touch into that felt sense of what it is we're looking for, then there's a larger likelihood that we can touch it in the here and now. And it's not just an idea, not just a concept. And then we're faced with the choice, not only once in our lives, but there are times in which it's 1,000 times a day. The choice of what do I want to nurture in my mind and heart? This is the meaning to me of the Buddha's final recorded words. Work out your own liberation diligently. And diligence is essential. But we've often turned our diligence and sometimes our practice into a dry, joyless thing. To me, diligence is the capacity to keep working our edge, the place that we feel just a little bit uncomfortable, wherever that edge might be in this moment. Becoming curious, perhaps, about why our edge is there in this moment. And then being willing to fail over and over again, because it's often when we fail, when the bottom drops out of our bucket, that true insight has a chance to arise. So my first invitation for each of us today is to be willing to do our work. This means to get really concrete. It means to be willing to look at our life and not so much at the lives of others. We're quite good at that. We're experts in that. For sure, we've got a lot of thoughts and a lot of opinions, a lot of views about what other people or groups of people need to be working on. But real and lasting transformation comes from being willing to turn our attention to our own mind and life. And we come to an understanding of how things come to be. And from the basis of that understanding of how things come to be within us and within our own experience, we bring that understanding to bear on the situation outside. Rather than talking constantly about the concept of suffering, of dukkha. What's your suffering? What's your dukkha? How does dukkha manifest in you? What's the noble truth of suffering, of dukkha in your life? What's the noble truth of liberation in your own life? It's from concretely recognizing and understanding how this energy, this tendency towards dukkha arises in you, that understanding and compassion arise, and you can understand how dukkha has come to be in another person or a group of people, your real work. In fact, perhaps the most important work of your life is when you're touched by something, when you're angry, when you're confused, when you're happy, to look into those and understand their roots. And then also to notice when you're not touched by something and to understand why that is. And then to be willing to embark and remain on that journey of discovery. Your work, your real spiritual practice is right in the heart of your life, just as it is. Waking up, drinking a cup of tea, opening the windows, walking around, sweeping the floor. These can be absolutely meaningless, or the most profound thing we've ever done up to now. And the scary and most wonderful thing is ultimately it's up to us, whether we want to choose to make those moments of our life the richest and most profound moments we've had or not. Nobody can do it for us. We've been very well trained and very well conditioned to be distracted and to be running after things, to be running after views, ideas, and positions. And We've been very well trained to not be powerful. To me, the foundational work for real and lasting change, the work that nurtures resilience, is to notice when we feel angry, when we feel judged, we feel tired, burned out, discriminated against, and become interested in the roots of those. How they've come to be on an individual and then a collective level. It's then that insight and happiness arises, not when we get rid of these things. You know, insight doesn't arise. In fact, let me save you, hopefully, a lot of time here. Up until now, insight has never arisen in the absence of these things. But from within them, if we shine the light of mindful awareness on them. So many of us love the image of the lotus flower. We feel very spiritual when we look at lotus flowers, or we think about lotus flowers and so on. But the invitation of the lotus flower is to do this work. The lotus flower's beauty comes from transforming the mud, and the mud here is these things in our life, our anger, our sadness, our isolation. These are the grounds from which the insight that heals, will arise from. And from touching into what's actually arising in our mind, in our heart, in our life, and allowing it to call us forth, allowing it to be our teacher. We cultivate the willingness to embark and remain on that journey of discovery, no matter what inconvenient truths about ourselves, about life, and about others we discover. And if we're lucky, we're going to discover many. When we think of war and conflict, many of us think of the very real and heartbreaking conflicts around the world at this moment in time. But there are also many places of war in the human heart. And in fact, some of us approach our meditation practice, our spiritual life, as a kind of war, kind of guerrilla war, a war of attrition. We might even consider it to be a holy war. Let's notice some of the languaging that's common in some practice circles. Fight the defilements, and so on. Not realizing that the things that we call hindrances are in fact the very ground from which wisdom and insight arise if we look deeply into them and we understand their roots. In our spiritual life, it seems to me that it can be helpful to consider some of the subtle views that we hold. For example, what does transforming your suffering mean to you? Let's imagine that you're a person that experiences physical pain. Does transforming suffering mean that there's no more physical pain, for example? Is that something that's even possible in this samsara realm? If we have a human body, we will experience discomfort. Rather than getting rid of something, transformation is about developing a new relationship with an experience. Each one of our work, the mud in each of our lives, while there's a commonality, there's also a uniqueness. We have a unique constellation of opportunities, a unique constellation of teachers. These unexpected teachers who are most likely not people, that are arising and offering us chances to deepen our understanding, to open our heart in every moment. The greatest teachers of our life are our anger, our jealousy, our depression, and so on. And knowing that each of our work is slightly different, in some way while you need to be present for my work, and I need to be present for and hold space for your work, and there's an intimate connection between those two. My work is my work. Your work is your work. Your transformation is your transformation. The kind of insight, the kind of compassion, the kind of wisdom that you're called to bring to the world might be different from what I'm called to bring to the world. And I think it's time for each of us to fully take responsibility for our journey, for our work, for the unique journey of discovery that each of us is on. When we show up in a full way for our own transformation, and we begin seeing and understanding the roots of our own pain and suffering, we begin to have enough space in our heart to begin seeing the many complex causes and conditions that have given rise to the pain of another person, group of people, or that's manifesting in a situation. Often we can feel so disempowered that our attention is constantly drawn outside to the very real anger, dismissiveness, and judgment that's occurring, and we end up focusing on what whoever they are for us in this moment, need to fix or need to do in order to transform the situation. And for sure, they might need to do a lot. But what if they don't have the awareness, the willingness, or the capacity in this lifetime? This is the reality. Not every single transformation that we're hoping for will occur in our lifetime. And what does that mean for you? Lately, it seems to me that rather than being a platitude, something nice that we say because it sounds spiritual, the practice of showing up for life, for our life, just as it is, also means, or perhaps most importantly, for the work of resilience, means embracing the reality that not every possible transformation within ourselves or within the world may happen in this lifetime. And in some kind of strange and counterintuitive way, to take inspiration and encouragement to keep going from that. That we're all works in progress, and there's always more progress to be made. In some way, the fact that there'll always be more to discover, always more work to be done to transform our minds and hearts, to protect the earth, to work for a more inclusive society is an inspiration. It's a calling forth into action, not reaction. The real action of noticing, first of all of the complex nuances of our own minds and hearts, and then noticing and creating space for those of whoever we call the other or they. And from that basis of not pushing anything or anyone aside, moving forward together to create lasting change. Each of us has a wound. In fact, it probably led us to the spiritual life. And our wound can call us forth if we know how to take care of it well. It can be the ground from which the insight that we're meant to offer to ourselves and to the world springs from, if we allow it to be our teacher. It is possible, however, to react from this place of the untransformed wound. And in that case, we simply repeat the same patterns over and over again. And this is also true in the case of activism. If we just react from our pain, then often we end up recreating the same dynamics over and over again. I call this reactivism. On the other hand, if we acknowledge and embrace our wound, look deeply into its causes and conditions, then it becomes possible to work for change from a non-resistant place, since we also understand that everything has its causes and conditions for arising. This is because that is. with this understanding, we know that, as the saying goes, whatever we resist persists. Rather than just resisting, which is struggle on the superficial level, we see how things have come to be, all the causes and conditions, and we engage with the pain and its roots. This, to me, also means that we practice to embrace each other person in their entirety, just as they are, and even as they try to exclude us, to not give in to the temptation to exclude them from our hearts. That'd be too easy. And if we're really honest, this is what happens with the phenomenon of cancel culture, which to me is a byproduct of the interaction between our own innate cognitive biases and the relentless social media algorithm that shows us more of what the algorithm thinks that we agree with or like, and less of what challenges us. And we've begun to behave like this in our life towards ourselves and towards others. And to me, the effects of this are deep. It seems important to acknowledge that not every single person on this planet is going to agree with us or our opinions, and we're not going to agree with them. Not every single person on this planet is going to roll out the red carpet for us as individuals or a group. And I'm learning to be okay with that and to keep going regardless. Right now, the situation of our world can seem quite dire, the world outside and the world inside. The two have never really been separate. Let's enjoy the sound of the bell. Coming back to our bodies, coming back to our breathing, just opening a space of availability to our experience in this moment. Usually when I offer a Dharma talk, I offer a lot of stories. There are often a lot of jokes. I think people remember the stories and the jokes more than they remember the lists of things. And so if I can plant the Dharma in those stories and people remember the stories rather than a list of 52 different factors of this or 28 of something else, then I think it'll be more useful. There are not so many jokes coming this evening, but sometimes it's like that. I feel like I really want to offer a talk from my heart to everybody. I was reflecting earlier on one of our great teachers, our great meditation teachers' invitation to be a real human being, to get real. And so for me, I feel like this practice of getting real is something that we desperately need. Particularly in terms of our spiritual life, to resist this temptation that we've been fed, this bias that we have of thinking spiritual life is somehow about transcendence, about rising above. In the Lotus Sutra, we have that beautiful image of the celestial Bodhisattvas, these great Bodhisattvas, these great beings who are floating on clouds and so on, gathering around and saying to the Buddha, we want to help you to share this wonderful Dharma. We want to help you bring this teaching to all living beings and rescue living beings. And the Buddha, well, it doesn't actually say this in the sutra, but the Buddha, I like to imagine, pauses for a moment and then says, you know, I don't actually need your help. I have all the help that I need. There are millions of bodhisattvas that are helping me, and the celestial, angelic, heavenly beings, heavenly bodhisattvas say to the Buddha, what are you talking about? And the Buddha points out to the valley at the foot of the Eagle Peak, Vulture Peak. And out of the earth spring forth all of these bodhisattvas from the earth. Now, this is a very powerful, almost apocalyptic image in the Lotus Sutra. And there are many different ways to interpret this. But in the context of this talk, these bodhisattvas who are doing this great work of transformation and healing in the world are bodhisattvas that spring forth not from the sky, not from the clouds, not from transcendence, not from rising above experience, but from the earth, from the earth of embodied experience. And what this means is, in one aspect, in one interpretation, is to turn towards our experience, to offer the wisdom that arises when we look deeply into the earth of our experience, to not somehow rise above, but to be an embodied practitioner. That's the wisdom that transforms. In Buddhism, there's a metaphor of a raging stream, which is more of a torrent, really. And when I think of this torrent, I remember years ago in Upper Hamlet in Plum Village, France, when the brothers of Upper Hamlet went on the first canoeing outing that they ever had. Once a year, we have an opportunity to have kind of a monastic Sangha building day. And so we went on this canoeing day together down the Vézère River. And we were canoeing down the river when the brother who was in the canoe with me said, "Brother Phap Hai, lay down and take a rest. I'll row for a while." So I lay down and I napped, and as I was napping, suddenly our canoe was caught in some rapids and I was flung out of the boat. I didn't know which way was up or which way was down, and I began thrashing around. I was disoriented. And after thrashing around for a while, I realized that the first thing was to stop struggling against myself, to try to relax right in the middle of that whirlpool, to let the stream be the stream. And that way, I would slowly be able to figure out what I needed to do. So I did just that. I let my body go limp. And a few seconds later, although it felt like a long time, it was a few seconds later, I broke the surface. Letting our bodies go limp in the middle of a whirlpool outside or a whirlpool inside, is the very last thing that we feel like doing. But it's not the same as surrender. It's a choice to understand, to gain clarity, and to be able to take a breath. For many of us, just the possibility to be able to take a breath, to be able to rest for a moment, can seem like an incredible luxury when it seems like the whirlpool, the raging torrent of violence, of self-hatred, of discrimination is present everywhere. Many of us will wonder when we'll be able to break the surface and take a breath. Rather than being a surrender or a passive acceptance, letting our bodies go limp in the middle of the raging torrents inside and outside is to choose to resource ourselves and to resource each other, and to acknowledge our capacity to kick out and to swim forward in the direction that the insight we carry in our body leads us to go. It's an act of loving kindness. It's an act of you saying to yourself, I'm here for you. I'm able to do this. I can take another step. In Buddhism, we speak of this raging torrent within and around that's flowing in one direction. And in that situation, we can choose to go with the stream, to go against it, to stand firm, or to cross over. And in terms of crossing over, the Buddha described 4 floods for us to cross over, 4 raging currents that are inside and outside. And these are very practical examples of the stream that we often find ourselves in, individually and collectively. They're called Olga, the 4 Olga. The first is Kamolga, which is sensual desire. Being pulled in this direction and that direction by our senses. Whenever we have a sense impression, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, and so on, there's a response, there's a shade of feeling. It can be a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, or some kind of neutral feeling. When there's a stimulus, there's a response. Most of the time, actually, we don't even notice the inputs, which is why a practice of becoming aware of sense impressions, sinking into the practice of becoming aware of the sounds that we hear and our responses to those, the smells that we are experiencing in each moment and our responses to those, the sights that we experience and our responses to those, and the sensations in our body and so on, can be a very powerful practice. We begin to notice that with this sound, there's that kind of shade of feeling. And we ask ourselves, why is that? Why is there that shade of feeling? We become sensitive to something that we hadn't been aware of up until now. The Buddha described our situation in terms of sense impressions in a very famous sutra as being like a cow with no skin, since most of the time we don't actually notice all of the sense inputs that we're receiving in each moment. Many of us are quite tired in our daily life, and even though we're very tired, we reach for more sense impressions. When we're tired, we go and we get, we turn on the TV, or we go and get a device to look at, we check the news, all these things that it's such a habit energy, such a powerful pull that we have to these things. But actually, in those moments when we're tired, what we actually need is rest, to be able to come back to ourselves, to come back to our experience, and to become aware of the fact that our mind has this tendency to be pulled this way and that. Our teacher calls this the practice of closing down the sense doors. The second of the four floods is the flood of, that's called in Pali bhavoga. It means the flood of becoming. We've already spoken about this energy of becoming in terms of craving earlier in this talk. Out of this sense of dissatisfaction combined with our feeling of lack, we think we need one more thing or many more things in order to finally arrive. But funnily enough, we never seem to quite get there, wherever there is for us. I heard a phrase a couple of years ago that I liked very much. It's called stuffication, becoming suffocated in stuff. And this, to me, they were talking about it in terms of people who are hoarding a whole lot of things. But I started to realize that we can have a whole lot of stuff that's not necessarily physical stuff. We can have a whole lot of mental stuff. We can have a whole lot of emotional stuff as well. A few years ago, Marie Kondo became quite popular in the monastery. Somebody donated the book, I forget what it's called, The Magical Art of Tidying Up or something like that. And it was given to our monastic library, and the brothers really loved this book so much. And it was so funny to watch all the brothers read this book, and then Marie Kondo their small monks' rooms, because we monks have a wooden box that we, in the Plum Village tradition, that we sleep on, and we have 3 robes and a bowl and a couple of books, things like that. We don't really have a whole lot of stuff, but even with just 3 robes, a bowl, and a few books, like all the brothers were Marie Kondoing their place, and they're all sharing what a great practice it was for them, you know, to rearrange their physical things, but also to be reflecting on the kind of attitudes, the positions, the views, and patterns of behavior that they were becoming suffocated by. So in a way, I mean, I guess you could say the monastics are not really the target demographic for advertisers. Like we're not really the target demographic, and I think that's a good position. If we have to have a position, I think that's a good position for us as practitioners to have. You know, we're not the target demographic. We have enough. And actually, we do have enough. We have enough stuff, for sure. We have enough suffering. We have enough happiness. We have enough insight and we have enough capacity. We have enough capacity to be able to wake up to our situation. The third of the four floods is in Pali language, it's called Dittoga, which is the flood of views. Our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh Thay, shared in the heart of the Buddha's teaching that Buddhism, as much as, let's be honest, we would sometimes wish it to be different, Buddhism is not there to give us a whole new set of views, but actually to release us from the prison of views. And then the fourth flood is the flood in Pali called avijjoga, which is ignorance, the flood of ignorance, of not seeing clearly, of not seeing our own situation or the situation of the world around us clearly. And we can engage in working with these floods when we recognize them arising in our mind, in our experience, and in our life as a kind of war, thrashing about. But you know what? We're just going to tire ourselves out and we won't get that far. Or we can soften our body, soften our heart, and just keep moving forward. To keep moving forward in a determined way, without any interruption. Now, isn't that the heart of the practice? Just to keep moving forward in an uninterrupted way. To me, that's the heart, the very essence of the practice life. And it's also a manifestation of resilience. To not settle for what others tell you, or for that matter, what you tell yourself. To be continually exploring new aspects of life, and this is the very definition of practice. To me, this quality is absolutely necessary in this moment. If a future, individual and collective, is going to be possible, this is practice. I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to betray myself into small comforts, mistaking them for real security. It's time to get real. As a practitioner, the willingness to question all of our assumptions and beliefs and the ways that we do things is fundamental to dealing with conflict, and also, to me, any meaningful spiritual life. To be in that place of not taking things for granted, of being willing to embark and remain for the whole of our lives on a journey of discovery of what this world is and what our real situation is. It means to not run away, even when, or especially when, we discover what I like to call an inconvenient truth about the world outside or the world inside. It's inconvenient because it's going to be against the current. And any real insight, any real discovery will by its very nature be inconvenient, since it's going to shake us out of our preconceived notions. Otherwise, if it's something that just fits our preconceived ideas and notions, then it's probably not the highest wisdom. Wisdom, insight doesn't come pre-packaged. And the thing is, if we're lucky and we're progressing on our spiritual path, we'll continually discover inconvenient truths about ourselves or about the world around us. And that's what spiritual life, spiritual practice is all about. Being willing to show up for what is, for what's real and for what's true. And then not to settle and think that we've reached the ultimate, but to keep on going. A real spiritual life is a continual practice of exploring who we think we really are, what we think the world is, how we think something has come to be, and being absolutely authentic to that discovery, which, if we apply mindfulness and investigation correctly, will be that all the layers of identification, all the labels that we have for this thing that we call the self, the places we identify for this experience, that experience, they're actually false. And this is not easy, but it's necessary now more than ever. in the texts, there are said to be two ways to deal with fear and with challenging situations. The first practice is the practice that we call in Plum Village changing the peg. If it's too much to handle, then we go and we do something that we find nourishing and healing. But for this to be meaningful, it can only ever be a first step. It can't be a final resting place. Otherwise, it's a practice of avoidance, of spiritual bypassing. To be honest, many of us have a master's degree in this already. Some people might even call it spirituality, ascendance or transcendence, the continual running away from what is. And this strategy is going to work for a while. But without the courage to kick out and to start swimming against the current of our own habit energies, we'll drown. The first practice of changing the peg is a practice to undertake in order to resource ourselves for the second aspect of the practice, which is to turn towards that thing which is challenging us, the so-called demon, the demon outside, or the demon within, and to befriend it, to understand that this is your greatest teacher who's come to you in an unexpected form. And that if we're solid, if we're clear, then hidden in this situation is great wisdom. So please, look at your life. Look at your situation. And let us, as good students of the Buddha, do what the Buddha so often invited us to do. From seeing how dukkha arises within us, it's so easy to see it in others, isn't it? To build ourselves a raft of the teachings and practices that will help us to transform that situation. And using the metaphor of crossing over, we might see ourselves at this moment as standing on a shore of suffering, and that we need to cross over to a shore of liberation. And we build ourselves a raft of teachings and practices that are appropriate for us, and we make this journey of crossing over, if we're lucky, not only once, but many times a day, the journey of 1,000 lifetimes or the journey of a single moment. And then when we cross over that raging torrent, something strange, something wonderful happens. We pull ourselves up on the bank of the shore of liberation. And we stand up, we look around, and we realize that we're standing in exactly the same place as we were before we began that journey. But somehow, everything has changed. That which we've been looking for has in some way been right here all along. So dear family, let's enjoy a sound of the bell. So dear friends, that's probably enough from me this evening. I would love to hear your insights. I'd love to hear your sharings. We have a few minutes. It's about 8:15 according to my clock here. So we have a few minutes together, and it would be lovely to hear some sharings from you. What's alive for you? What's coming up for you? What are you looking at? So I'd like to bow out now and pass over to you, to pass over to our facilitators, and enjoy the discussion that we'll have together.
Thank you so much, brother. I felt like that was such a heartfelt transmission of the Dharma. Like I could feel it in my heart, and I think there's others here who are nodding their heads as well. So thank you so much for the sharing. And let's open to the floor. If anyone has any questions or anything that has arisen for you, any comments that you wish to make, here's the time to share. And those who are online, you're welcome to unmute yourself and share as well. Or if you prefer it, you could also put it into the chat. For those who are here and you don't want to just speak, it's okay. You could also write it on the pieces of paper that's available to you as well. So we'll just give people a few moments. Oh, we have a volunteer already. So maybe we'll start with Mayanne. Thanks, Mayanne.
Hi, brother. Thank you very much for the talk. I was just wondering, you mentioned quite a few times about being open to experiences, and I recognize that fear is one of the biggest barriers for me in being open, and just wondering for any particular advice about combating that emotion. Thanks.
Sorry, brother, if you could just unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, there are so many people in my life that would love to have a mute button. So it's a very, very rare experience to be muted. So let's enjoy that. That's a big one. The question of fear. There's no one way to work with fear, since fear can arise from so many different sources. Yeah, there are things that I'm afraid of, for example, that nurture fear in me that they don't nurture fear at all in other brothers. For example, I lived in Deer Park Monastery in California, Southern California, for 19 years in total, and we have a lot of rattlesnakes there. And so, I'm a little afraid of the rattlesnakes, but a lot of the brothers are not. And the brothers are really happy to volunteer to be the snake catchers, because in the monastery, we have a lot of rattlesnakes, and it tends to be the brothers funnily enough, without health insurance, who like to volunteer to be the snake catchers. They are not afraid at all. They'll just go up and they know exactly how to catch the rattlesnake or to guide it into like a tube and then to carry it down the mountain. And they're not afraid at all. And one time we caught 2 rattlesnakes, and the brothers put them into rubbish bins. And we were driving them. We decided to drive them we were getting too many rattlesnakes in Deer Park Monastery, so we decided to drive them to a natural reserve nearby. So we drove, and every time the car would go over a bump, we'd go over a bump, and the rattlesnake would go and it was right next to me. The bin was right next to me in the car, and it would make this loud rattling sound. And so this visceral reaction of fear would come up. It was something I intellectually understood. But even though I intellectually understood where it was coming from and that the rattlesnake was in like a bin, it's not going to jump out and bite, still that feeling come up. So intellectual understanding is not the key, like to overcome fear. It's not necessarily going to help, because it's this primitive part of our brain that's being activated. So anyway, on the lighter side, we finally arrived at the reserve. There was a large road going past, and 2 brothers, we got out to release the rattlesnakes from a trash can. And then as we were releasing the rattlesnake, all of these cars were pressing their horn. And I was thinking, what are they pressing their horn for? And then I realized, they're probably thinking we're dumping rubbish here. And then I thought, if they just saw that we were releasing snakes here, maybe they'd be happier. But then I thought, maybe they're not going to be happier. Like, turn around and say we're releasing snakes here, they wouldn't be happier at all. So, it can be like that. What is helpful for me in terms of fear is to see that the root of fear is actually, it's related to ill will. Like in Buddhist psychology, it's related to the root of ill will, a closing down of the heart towards ourselves, towards some part of our experience, or towards something else. So kind of like in the case of a snake, of course, we're closing down our heart. We want to protect our life, which is a wonderful and positive thing. But there's a closing down of the heart, to that being and to its kind of natural expression. So one way to slowly over time to transform that root is the practice of loving kindness. And one of the most powerful ways to cultivate loving kindness is a practice that is called the saturation method. I find it really lovely. It's kind of a practice of loving kindness meditation that you allow to spread out through your entire body. Just like when you place a drop of oil on a sheet of paper, it spreads out and fills the sheet of paper over time. And I really recommend that practice. You can find some beautiful guided loving kindness meditations on the Plum Village app, which is in the Apple Store or the Android store if you want to check it out. So the practice of loving kindness is one way to work with fear on a root level. So good luck.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, brother. Yes, we have a friend here at the Metta Center. Her name is Mira. She would like to ask a question.
I didn't want to ask a question, but I just like to say thank you, like, for beautiful presentation. I really enjoyed, and like in terms of practice, like it's a lot of things that like I have to learn, but this presentation is really open-minded and beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mira. Wonderful. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I had a question.
Yes.
So I just wanted to know, when accepting someone in their entirety, as discussed before, how would you? Sorry. Oh, good. When accepting people in their entirety, how do you control anger and frustration when discussing disagreements and views?
I got the first part. When we're accepting someone in their entirety, how do we
control anger and frustration when discussing disagreements and views?
Oh, I don't really know. I never have any anger arising. I never have any body, like no frustration at all. I just walk around like I'm walking on lotus flowers. The first thing I want to share is that I think that anger is not something to be controlled. It's something to be looked at. It's something to be understood. Like that's when we look at the way the Buddha formulated his teachings. Anger or whatever strong emotions arising, it's something to be understood. This is what we call like the second turning of the wheel. The first is the recognition. We call that the recognition. And then the second turning of the wheel in terms of the noble truths. And this is in terms of the real like noble truths of our life is what we call the encouragement, which is this situation is to be understood. So in the moment, there's two things I'd like to talk about. One is the moment when anger is arising. That's a tough one. I mean, we all have our what I like to call our patterns in the carpet, our tracks in the carpet. My grandparents lived in a house that never moved beyond the 70s. It was in the 90s and it was still the 70s in that house. It had avocado green toaster and a triangle pattern wallpaper and all these things, but also it had shag pile carpet. And over the years, I miss shag pile carpet. Over the years, these tracks had developed in the shag pile carpet from the chairs that my grandparents would sit into to like the kitchen and the bedrooms and stuff like that, the places that they would always walk. So for each of us, we also have those tracks in the carpet. We can call them kleshas if we want, or habit energies. But, you know, this is something, it's a very technical term for basically these patterns of behavior. So what nurtures anger, to use the example that you gave, which is anger, might be different in you to what it is in me or what it is in another person. And this is based on various factors. It could be our family history, our personal history, our genetic sensitivities, our particular positions, all these kind of things, what we think is right and wrong, our individual ethics and stuff. The reality is that what we call reality or what we call the truth is not shared by any other person. Everybody has a quite unique experience of this thing we call the world. And so when something happens, when there's a stimulus, we have what we call a response. So somebody said something, they share some kind of view, like they might be on a political spectrum that's quite different from our own. I'm thinking of this because of the situation in the US at the moment. So there are families that have split apart, can't talk to each other and things because there are people on very different political spectrums. So somebody says something, and then what happens is a seed is nurtured in our consciousness. We have a reaction. We think it means this, or they're trying to say this or that. Most of the time when we have a sense impression, what we react to is not the sense impression itself. Whether it's, and by sense impression, I can mean a sound, I can mean a phrase, I could mean a sensation in the body, but we react to the interpretation we make of that sense impression. We react to the story. So the first thing that I would recommend is, in a general level, and this takes time, practice takes time, to develop a tendency to keep asking ourselves, am I sure? To first recognize, as we did earlier, when sense impressions arise and the stories we tell ourselves about those things, hot, cold, good, bad, pleasant, unpleasant, or we have this perception arising and we ask ourselves, where did that come from? And did this person really mean this thing, or did they mean something else? What's their position? And then the other thing is, if we're in the beginning, we've kind of walked down, when we have a sense impression arising and we have an interpretation, our reaction might have already kind of continued on for a while before we become aware of it. We've already walked down that track in the carpet a little bit before we become aware of it. We're halfway to the kitchen, and then before we realize we've left the chair. So we get a little overwhelmed sometimes. And what I think is important to do as well in those moments is, if we really want to have a constructive conversation, is if we do notice ourselves becoming inflamed, to just touch into the relationship that we have with the other person and just be really honest and say to the other person, you know what, there are things I want to share, but I'm feeling a little bit unbalanced at the moment, and I might say something that I'll regret later, things like that. And then take some time away to come down and really look into what was arising and what you really want to communicate, and also ask what the other person really wants. Ask yourself what you really think the other person wants to communicate, and to to come from that kind of place. For me, that's our basic practice here. If we have any kind of emotion arising, strong emotion arising, we stop our communication and we take time to each reflect before we continue the conversation. And because we try to practice recognizing what's most important, which is not one particular view, but it's our relationship with each other. So that's the fundamental thing. So two aspects: looking at sense impressions, and also if we're activated on something, a little too activated, to take a little bit of time away to calm down and to reflect on what's most important. Finally, I'm just going to share the other thing that I often do, is to ask myself, will this matter in a year's time? Is it going to matter in a year's time? And if I say yes, it's going to matter in a year's time, it's going to matter, they need to understand this, then I ask, will it matter in 5 years? If the answer is still the same, I ask myself 10 years. And then most of the time when I get to 10 years, honestly, it's not going to matter that much. So recently I had one brother say to me, Brother Phap Hai, 2 years ago, we had a situation that we were quite upset with each other. And to be honest, I could remember being upset, but I couldn't remember what I was upset about. So that's often how it goes. Life's humbling, isn't it? Also, somebody just put in there, will it matter when I'm dead? Probably not.
Puts things in perspective, doesn't it, brother?
It does.
I just want to say thank you so much, brother. That was so helpful, and I hope that answered people's questions. And what a beautiful session indeed. So thank you all for your participation. I'm just going to hand it back over to Sophia for the closing.
Thank you, brother, and thank you, Tina, for the facilitation. I echo Tina's point. I think, what a wonderful talk. It was an experience and a talk at the same time. Brother, would you mind or like to do a dedication of merits before we close up, or we can do prayer, whichever that you prefer?
I think I'd just like to do a very simple one. We can each close our eyes and bring to mind people or places on earth or situations in our own mind and heart that could use a little spaciousness, that could use the energy of compassion, to use the energy of insight. And just holding those people, those places, those situations in our mind and heart, let's just take a moment to sit quietly and to dedicate all the energy, a real wish that they also experience a moment of relief, a moment of compassion, a moment of joy. And after just a couple of breaths, I'll invite a sound of the bell. Thank you so much for having me. I hope we have a chance to meet each other many times. So blessings to each one of you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, brother, very much.